We've got big games this weekend. In fact, they got one in Columbus, Ohio that's going to, one way or another, alter the entire course of the playoff. It is Indiana. It is Ohio State. It's an Ohio State game, so it's going to kick off at noon. That's just what they do now. This line has gone from Ohio State minus 11.5 to Ohio State minus 12.5. This is what we call a classic freeze point moment. Not because of the temperature outside, which should be in the 40s, but because this is what we find out about teams who have played inferior competition and looked really good. No one's knocking Indiana because they've done exactly what a good team should do against bad teams. They've largely smoked them. That's wonderful. That's exactly what you should do. However, what you haven't given us what your schedule hasn't given us the opportunity to do is see you against elite competition. So we get to see that this Saturday. That's great. That's like a few days away, and then we can put all that to rest. The freeze point is one of the built-in mechanisms we have on this show to look at something about you. Could be your passing game, could be your running game, could be your pass defense. And if you haven't faced anyone who can test you, you're finally facing someone who can test you. So our theory on that is no different than water freezing. There is a point, 32.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And if it's 39 or 37 or 35 in the room, it doesn't matter whether it's either of those, the water's never going to freeze. It's got to get to 32.4. And then anywhere below that, it'll just freeze quicker. We got to find out if Indiana as a team, as the quality of team, meets the freeze point. Because there are a couple of aspects of this game where if they don't, they could get exposed. But if they do, and I think we'll know pretty quickly, then Ohio State could lose this game outright. So everybody's focused on schedule right now with Indiana as it relates to the college football playoff talk. I don't think that's how you should break this game down. I think you should look at schedule when you break this game down, but not totality. Where are the common opponents? We're trying to figure out who's going to win this game. We're trying to figure out how these teams stack up. So they've played three common opponents. They've both played Michigan State, Nebraska, and Northwestern. What if I told you Indiana, comparatively, has fared better against these teams in terms of margin of victory than Ohio State? They both played Michigan State. Indiana won by 37, Ohio State by 31. They both played Nebraska. Indiana won by nearly half 100. Ohio State squeaked by 4. Ohio State did beat Northwestern by 24. Indiana beat them by 17, but Indiana's dropped 40 plus in all three games against those teams. And the dynamics edge is also in Indiana's favor because Ohio State's playing their 5th straight game and Indiana's off a bye. So there are some blinking red lights there that aren't an indicator one way or the other as to how the game's going to go, but it is something to pay attention to. So there is a chance, obviously, that Ohio State just breaks this game open, and it will come if Indiana's run defense is fraudulent. That's the freeze point mark of this entire game. Because Indiana on paper has the #1 run defense in the country, and they have not faced a rushing offense worth anything. They have faced 7 teams in conference play, and none of them have a rushing offense better than 73rd. 6 of them are 90th or worse. Now, that doesn't mean that Indiana is fraudulent. It just means they could be. So what are we looking for? Well, we're looking at Ohio State's ground game early on. Ohio State does not have the best rushing offense in the country, per se, but they should be able to, if you look at the game on paper, have some success here. If they're getting stoned early on the ground, this entire game has turned. If Ohio State cannot control this game on the ground, if they can't look at that blue chip ratio, and by the way, Ohio State's blue chip ratio, they got blue chip players, former 4- and 5-star player. Ohio State's got 69 of them. Indiana has 10. It should be a roster game on paper, which we don't play football games on. But just the mere paper of it all says Ohio State ought to be able to flex their personnel on Indiana and win. We know that's not always the way football games go, but one of the areas they should be able to do it is they ought to be able to run the ball. They ought to be able to do to Indiana what we saw Michigan do to teams last year. They never should have to look at Will Howard to win this game. They may have to, but they shouldn't have to. So we're going to see that run defense, if it's up to the task, this entire game swings. Because if Ohio State cannot control the game running the ball, well, then it becomes kind of a matchup of quarterbacks. They'll never be on the field at the same time, but you know what I mean when I say that. And I'm going to tell you, Indiana, I think, knows the path is kind of narrow in this game, but it widens a little bit if it becomes QB versus QB, because I think they're happy accepting their odds if it's just Curtis Rourke against Will Howard. Now, that sounds like I'm knocking Will Howard. I'm not. I am not knocking him. I'm saying Indiana's best chance to win disproportionately is if they pull that game in the direction of shootout, which quarterback can make the most plays. This wide receiver core, while there aren't a ton of like Bolitnikoff finalists for Indiana, they don't disproportionately rely on one guy. So they can spread the ball around, and if they make it like that, they got a shot. But then I think, on the other hand, about just the quality of team. It's going to come down to that with Ohio State. You're just facing a higher caliber team on virtually every front than you've seen so far this year. I wonder what to make of the Michigan game for Indiana. That was a one-possession game, which is a good win. You know, you just recalibrated things to think Indiana's a top 5 team, Michigan's terrible, so they should pull away from them. That's not the way that works. But if you did struggle to put Michigan away, then maybe that's an early indication the quality of team doesn't scale the better the opponent gets. Ohio State's really tough at home, man. You know, a Michigan game or two here and there notwithstanding recently. Ohio State's tough at home. So, Colin, we've waited for this all week. Let's take a look at what the model thinks. The FanDuel number right now is Ohio State minus 12.5. Model's got Ohio State minus 14. Guys, I think they're going to win, and I think they're going to cover. I don't think it's a blowout game. I think Indiana's going to be very competitive. I think that the span of 4 quarters matters a lot here. Like, I think the second half of this game matters a lot here. And remember, this game being tied at the half and Ohio State getting a couple of field goals and a touchdown late is enough to cover in this game. So, you know, 34-21 is enough to cover in this game. I think that's about what we're looking at here. I think Ohio State will win. I think Ohio State will cover. I don't expect this definitive, like, nail in the coffin performance from Ohio State. And I'll also tell you this, not to be too speculative, because there's a lot of gray area and unknown, but doesn't it benefit Ryan Day and Ohio State potentially to have this game stay close enough to where Indiana makes the playoff? It's good for your conference, but even if you don't care about that, it's also good because it may mean one less SEC team in the postseason, which is good for you guys, period. But also, it's one less team that has a more comparable roster to yours in the postseason. And that may mean something, depending on how the bracket falls for you down the road, if you are so fortunate as to make the playoff. Now, the other thing that I would ask you to do, 2 things. First off, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we do this show totally free every week, 3 times a week, and we appreciate you guys watching, and the best way to do that and keep it free forever is to sub. The other thing that I want to leave you with, how will the committee treat Ohio State if they lose this game? Everybody who talks about this game is just talking about the Indiana impact. And if Indiana loses, / when Indiana loses, how far would they fall? And I am too, because that's the outcome I expect, but I've been wrong before. Actually, I haven't been wrong. I'm perfect this year. The games I've lost were mainly because coaches or kids or officials screwed it up. So I want you to write that in your journal tonight before you go to bed too. But let's just say Ohio State loses. I'm looking at their schedule here. They got a win against Iowa. They lost to Oregon. They squeaked by Nebraska. They would have to hang their hat, and it is a good win, on that win at Penn State, 20-13. But it becomes a little more slippery for Ohio State too, as you would imagine.